Dear Dr. Dobson, this letter is in response to your June 7, 2024 open letter to President Joe Biden. On June 7, 2024, you and your colleagues wrote an open letter to President Joe Biden where you accused the Biden administration of a series of dastardly activities. You are at the center of the evangelical Christian church both in America and abroad. You and the ministry you founded, Focus on the Family, are held in high regard by evangelical Christians like myself. Yet when I read this carefully thought letter, I cringe. I think it's because I'm Canadian, because I am not as close to the situation. I'm not lost in the MAGA milieu. But the information I have, along with my Christian values, simply sees the American situation much differently than you do. So I have selected a few talking points from your document to present in a different light. Dr. Dobson, you wrote of President Biden, "You have weaponized federal law enforcement against your political opponents. The lawfare your allies have waged against former President Donald Trump is reminiscent of a Soviet show trial, not our constitutional republic." At first glance, the case against Biden appears obvious. On November 15, 2022, Mr. Trump announced his candidacy for the 2024 election. 3 days later, Jack Smith was appointed as special counsel to pursue criminal charges against Mr. Trump. Therefore, it appears obvious that Jack Smith was appointed as special counsel to respond to Mr. Trump's candidacy. We know that Attorney General Garland has been pursuing 2 investigations into Mr. Trump's behavior prior to the appointment of Jack Smith. It was only when Garland believed that there was a good case against Mr. Trump that he appointed the special counsel. Therefore, another scenario is that the DOJ was investigating Citizen Trump prior to November 22nd, with the intent of dealing with Citizen Trump's criminal activity. Attorney General Garland decided to appoint Jack Smith as special counsel prior to November 18th. Could Attorney General Garland already have had a court date set by November 15th to make this announcement? Isn't it reasonable to consider that Citizen Trump got wind of the upcoming announcement and decided to get ahead of said announcement by declaring his candidacy? If the decision to pursue criminal charges was made prior to Mr. Trump's candidacy announcement, if Mr. Trump announced his candidacy because he knew what was coming, then the DOJ's actions were not against candidate Trump, but against Citizen Trump. And if so, Dr. Dobson, your entire weaponized federal law enforcement against your political opponent's accusation is false. The next fact that must be contended with is this: the charges against Mr. Trump are real. There is little question that he was maintaining 2 sets of books in New York. A jury of his peers concluded that he sexually assaulted, rape in most jurisdictions, a stranger. He attempted to override the vote in a number of states, such as South Carolina, and he concealed a substantial volume of highly classified documents. However, his biggest crime was attempting to overturn the 2020 election in multiple ways, culminating in a frontal attack on the Capitol that included an attempt to hang the vice president. This is fundamentally different than what comes to mind when I think of a Soviet show trial. Dr. Dobson, you went on to address issues regarding the Supreme Court. You and your allies are undermining the institution of the Supreme Court while smearing individual justices, putting their physical safety at risk. You have outright defied Supreme Court decisions. How puzzling I find this statement in light of what we Christians have been doing for the last 50 years. Have we not been undermining the institution of the Supreme Court while smearing individual justices, putting their safety at risk in our frustration over the Roe v. Wade decision? I don't believe that Christians were wrong to accuse the court of legislating from the bench on Roe. As I understand it, that is a free speech right. However, accusing others of doing what we Christians are doing is far outside the bounds of Christian integrity. And speaking of the court, can you not imagine holding our Supreme Court justices to a code of ethics? Ridiculous! One of the justices is clearly not living to the standards expected from all other federal court justices. He is clearly profiting, living the high life because of his position. President Biden has sought to amend the Constitution to establish ethical standards for the Supreme Court, and I laud him for doing it. Two decisions by the current court seem horribly wrong. First, the court concluded that determining that a person has engaged in insurrection under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is to be determined by Congress. Illogical! If it takes 2/3 majority of both House and Senate to overrule a declaration that one is an insurrectionist, it can't be left to a 50-50 vote to declare one to be an insurrectionist. Clearly, the court must decide on the facts on whether a person participated in an insurrection. And then there's the matter of absolute immunity for the president. How un-American. America does not have a king. You accuse President Biden of outright defying the court when he responds to the power granted to him by pushing for a constitutional amendment. With this amendment, President Biden would be giving up powers that he now has. Biden is actually choosing a path that diminishes his own power because that path is the correct path. This is the best proof of integrity, the definition of sacrificial integrity. And how did we get a court that is making such poor decisions? The Republican Party, supported by the Christian community, exercised the grossest display of unintegrous behavior I have seen from a Democratic body ever. In 2016, President Obama nominated Merrick Garland for the court. Senate leader Mitch McConnell declared that because there was less than a year in Obama's term, he wouldn't forward the nomination. Shortly after Mr. Trump became president, Neil Gorsuch was seated on the Supreme Court. However, just under 4 years later, when President Trump was days away from losing the 2020 election, his nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, was seated on the Supreme Court. Really? What happened to less than a year in his term? This was not integrity. The Christian community should have been in an uproar. But how could it? The religious right got the conservative Supreme Court that it wanted, a court conservative enough to overturn Roe v. Wade. But it was done by cheating. Unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain who build it. When will we learn Abram's hard lesson when he produced a baby by Hagar? God does not invite Christians to cheat to win, and Christians have not won. Roe was overturned, but there is now a court that is radically not upholding the Constitution. Dr. Dobson, you have leveled the following accusation at President Biden. You uplift the right to painfully kill unborn children and have expressed a desire to codify it into law. Of course, this is correct, but it is not Biden or the Democrats that have changed in this matter. The religious right made a change in abortion law by getting Roe v. Wade repealed. Abortion as a right has always been part of the philosophy of the Democrats. For them to want to correct this change is a no-brainer. And I point out that our complaint, re Roe v. Wade, has always been that the Supreme Court was legislating from the bench. We have been preaching forever that abortion law should be set by legislators. This is as it should be because the legislators follow the will of the people much more directly than the Supreme Court does. So what is our way forward on the topic of abortion? I have been in the forefront of the right to life movement for decades. I am passionate about this atrocity. Our way forward starts with us being a beacon of integrity. Christians need to be known as people of deep honesty, people who hold to our commitments, people who will do the right thing, even to our detriment. Christians also need to be seen as loving people. This includes being loving to those from other countries. It also includes being loving to the less well-off in our society. These matters will be addressed further in a few minutes. Once Christians reestablish themselves as loving beacons of integrity, our challenge is to change the hearts of the individuals in our society. When the vast majority see abortions to be as abhorrent as infanticide, the laws will change. Do remember that 2,000 years ago, the Roman citizenry would leave unwanted babies out to die. The Christians would rescue them. It took time, but there was deep philosophical, societal change. Dr. Dobson, you said you regularly employ rhetoric that amplifies racial divisions for your own political gain. This is race baiting, and it is immoral. I fear that this is an example of the pot calling the kettle black. The Republicans supported by Christians are renowned for practicing gerrymandering. You might claim that gerrymandering isn't on its face racist, but the Republican form of gerrymandering diminishes the voting power of the poorest sectors of our society. It has been noted that these areas are dominated by ethnic minorities, especially those of African ancestry. So this action is rightly labeled racist. However, racist or not, it is anti-Christian behavior. We do all know what you have done to the least of these, my brethren, you have done to me. But we know that without this gerrymandering, the Republicans won't win elections. Again, the Republican Party, supported by the Christians, is displaying a lack of sacrificial integrity. And until Christians are without sin in this matter, they have no right to point a finger at the current president. Dr. Dobson, you said you have willfully failed to enforce the laws governing immigration. First, this is patently not true. While there is a crisis of illegal immigration, President Biden's presidential proclamation and joint DHS-DOJ interim final rule cut encounters at southwest border by 55%. The president making proclamations that results in reduction of this problem hardly equates with your accusation. However, Christians must have an attitude of love for even the least of these that are not American citizens. It is true that the borders cannot be opened wide because doing so would overwhelm the nation. But as one considers the plight of those seeking refuge, one must turn to their countries of origin, seeking to improve their local situation. And I believe that this has exactly been Vice President Harris's strategy as she has sought to address this crisis. Dr. Dobson, you also said, when you ran in 2020, a major theme of your campaign was to bring America together. Instead, your actions have indisputably divided the country. At the behest of Donald Trump, Republicans rejected a bipartisan bill curtailing immigration because it would lose an election talking point. The fact that the Democrats sought to enact the bill proves you wrong in your claim that the Biden administration is willfully careless about illegal aliens. But it also shows that the Republicans, and by extension the Christians, are by no means angels in the division of your country. And if you listen to your champion, Mr. Trump, you hear a constant run of divisive rhetoric. His favorite hobby, for instance, is to produce an insulting name for every one of his opponents. And he presents illegal aliens as a bunch of thugs, when the vast majority of them are honest people seeking a better life. Dr. Dobson, you said, your massive deficits are breaking the backs and budgets of working class middle families, and you are planning massive tax increases in 2025. First, the massive deficits are a systemic problem that far predated President Biden. During President Trump's term, the national debt increased from $19.5 trillion to $26.9 trillion, an increase of $7.4 trillion. Under the Biden administration, the debt has now raised to $35.3 trillion, an increase of $8.4 trillion. Yes, the debt has ballooned under President Biden, but it ballooned under President Trump as well. And there are two ways to reduce deficits: lower spending and raise taxes. As America spends 7 times more on its military than any other nation does, reducing military spending seems the most logical place to cut. But the Republicans wouldn't possibly have that. The other option is tax increase. It's true that the Democrats want to increase taxes. They want to undo the tax decreases that were implemented by Republicans. And they want to increase taxes on the wealthiest Americans, people who can afford it. And what should the Christian attitude to tax increases in response to ballooning debt be? Jesus said, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's." Paul wrote, "This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing." While we should be holding our governments accountable to spend our tax dollars wisely, Christians should not be opposed to paying our fair share when the other option is ballooning debt. Dr. Dobson, you said, "Mr. President, the moral and constitutional framework that sustains our republic is at risk of collapsing due to your ill-advised and un-American policies." Dr. Dobson, you've got to be kidding. Mr. Trump attempted a coup 3 different ways: by falsely claiming election fraud, by attempting to establish fake electors, and by orchestrating a frontal assault on the Capitol, which included a clear attempt to assassinate the vice president. Mr. Trump presents an imminent danger to the constitutional framework. Because of his actions, Mr. Trump is not eligible to run for president under the clear reading of the 14th Amendment. And the only reason he is on the ballot is because the dishonestly established Supreme Court did not do their job. A vote for Mr. Trump is a vote for a constitutional crisis. Dr. Dobson, you have accused President Biden of dastardly acts that would be criminal if a president didn't have absolute constitutional immunity. You know that the Christian standard is to hold those in authority over us with high regard. I'm sure you would agree that it is solidly unchristian to accuse the president unless you have a very clear case. By the same token, you are one in authority in the evangelical Christian church. It is wrong of me to accuse you of this dastardly behavior unless I have a very clear case. Therefore, either I am seriously sinning by writing this document, or you have seriously sinned by writing yours. The American Christian Church, you need to repent. And the American Christian Church needs to recognize that it has not been behaving with integrity and to return to radical, sacrificial integrity. The American Christian Church must recognize the way that it has not been loving to the least of these and return to at least treating the least with fairness. The American Christian Church must start by repenting of this love affair with the lying, cheating, raping, insurrectionist Donald Trump. But it must recognize that its lack of integrity is much deeper than just Mr. Trump. You know, I sound like an Old Testament prophet, but I don't feel like one. I certainly don't claim to be saying, "Thus saith the Lord." I feel like a committed Christian who is looking at the data that I have and filtering it through my Christian values. But I do believe that the American Christian church, including you, Dr. Dobson, is having a crisis of integrity. And I do believe that for the sake of the Republic, Mr. Trump must not be president again.